I was born December 30th, 1924, and my parents were very young. I think my mother was only 18 and my dad was 20. And I was born in an upstairs apartment in a house north of the city of Holland. And I don't know when they moved, but it was when I was 2 years old, we were living in a new house on Lakewood Boulevard, about a mile from where I was born. I grew up there, and when I was 4 years old, I started school. In those days, you could start school as long as you were 5 before the end of the year. So I wouldn't have been 5 until almost the end of the year. So in September, I was 4 years old when I started Beechwood School.
What did your father do?
My father worked at the Holland Furnace. He was a molder. He made parts for cast iron furnaces. And he worked there as long as I can remember. He worked there until they closed that factory, and I think it was in 1960 something. But it was during the Depression that the factory closed, and that's when he was out of work for about a year. But the Depression didn't hit us until about 1931, because the people, a lot of the farmers across America had the money to buy new furnaces until 1931. The Depression didn't hit them until about then. And so he was out of work for about a year, I guess. And I know we had to go on welfare. And
did you come from a rather large family?
Yes, I came from a very large family. I had 5 brothers and 6 sisters, and I was the oldest. So there were 12 children in our family. And so there was always a baby in the house by us. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get in the Army. I wanted to get out of the house, and because of all the commotion. We didn't live in a very big house, and there was always a bunch of little kids around, and I think that's why when I got to be 18, I wanted to get out and get in the Army.
You were in high school when Pearl Harbor happened. Do you remember that day?
What
do you remember hearing about? What were your recollections of hearing about?
Well, it happened December 7, 1941, was on a Sunday. And when I grew up, Sunday was a day of rest. We were a very religious family. And so we didn't hear anything about Pearl Harbor, because we wouldn't have the radio or anything on Sunday. We went to church twice a day, and I didn't hear anything about Pearl Harbor until I got to school on Monday morning. And then everybody was talking about what happened at Pearl Harbor, that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And naturally, everybody was concerned, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? We all going to go to in the Army? Or because before that, I think it was in 1940, the National Guard was organized, and they were sent to Louisiana, and I think the draft might have started before 1941. I really don't remember when but the big thing was with the National Guard leaving. And of course, the war was going on in Europe. We knew all about that, but for the Japanese to bomb Pearl Harbor. That was quite a shock for everybody.
When did you finally join up, and how did that process work? Were you drafted, or did you volunteer in? How did that process work?
Well, for some reason, I wanted to join the Army. 1941, December 7th, 1941, I was just 16 years old. I wouldn't be 17 until the end of the year. Well, when I turned 17, that whole year I went to school and till June, and I graduated. And I always wanted to join the Marines. And so when I turned 18, the first thing I did, I went to Grand Rapids to join the Marines. And when I got to Grand Rapids, I found out that the Marine recruiting office was closed. They were no longer taking men. They were getting their men from the draftees. So I went back home, and I think probably the next day or the next couple of days, I went to my draft board and I said, put me down for the next draft quota that goes. Well, they already had the January draft quota set. So I said, put me down for February. So the first part of February, I went to Kalamazoo, took my physical, and at that time you could go, if you passed your physical, you could go right into the service or you could go home for a week. And I decided I went home for a week, and it was about the middle of February. My dad was going to take me to Grand Haven with the draft quota, and we got halfway to Grand Haven, and the cars stalled, and it was early in the morning because there was so much water in the gas that the gas line froze up. Well, I jumped out of the car and went and stood by the highway, and just luckily a car came by, and it was another man and his wife. He was going to go to the Army too, so they picked me up, and I went to Grand Haven with them. And in Grand Haven, we got on the train, and my dad got there just before we left, so I got to say goodbye to him. And then I took the train from Grand Haven to Holland. And in Holland, we stopped and picked up the draft quota for Holland. So I could have just as well stayed in Holland and instead of going away to Grand Haven, but that's the way it was. I had to go with the county draft quota instead of with the city draft quota.
And you rode the train where to? Where did you take the train to?
Then we took the train to Chicago. And I remember in Chicago, we all got off the train and we had dinner in Chicago. And then we got on another train and we went to Rockford, Illinois to Camp Grant. We got there on Saturday evening. They put us up in a barracks, and all day Sunday, nothing. We just were in the barracks. There was nothing doing with the Army on Sunday. And Monday morning, bright and early, we got up and we started our processing for the Army. We got all of our clothes, and I think while I was in Camp Grant, I think that's when I took a lot of tests. And we were in Camp Grant, I would say maybe 4 or 5 days. And then we got on a troop train and we went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And going through the mountains in Missouri was really cold. No heat in the old cars that we were in. But we finally got to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I was assigned to a flash and sound battery. And that was where you sit in a foxhole and you watch with a periscope for the firing of the enemy guns or the sound, and then you record that. That goes back to headquarters, and that way they can pinpoint where that sound came from or where the flash came from.
So originally you were going to be an enlisted artilleryman.
Right.
But that changed while you were at Fort Sill.
Yeah.
Tell me what happened?
Well, while I was in Fort Sill, I got called to the general's office. That was just as I was going to start basic training. And I went to the general's office, and of course, something that kind of funny happened there. I'm sitting there waiting to get called. They told me, now, when you go to see the general, you say yes or no, sir. And so I went in, they called my name. I went in and saw the general. And the first thing the general said, "What's the matter, Private? Don't that shirt fit?" He said, "You got the button open on top." So I didn't realize, and so, well, anyway, he questioned me a little bit, and he said, at your age and at your IQ, you should be going to officers training. But he said, since you're only just 18, he said, we're going to put you in the flash and sound battery until you graduate after your basic training. But after I took my basic training for about 4 of the 6 weeks, another kid in the barracks said to me, he said, will you go with me to the Air Force Reception Center at Fort Sill and take the test for the Air Force? He said, if you have 2 years of college, or if you can pass the exam, you can be either a pilot, navigator, or a bombardier. So I said, yeah, I'll go with you. I said, I must have had the afternoon off or what, something. And so we went to the Air Force recruiting office at Fort Sill. And that fellow that I was with said to the sergeant, he said, I want to take the test. And so the sergeant said, okay. And he said to me, he said, you're going to wait for him? I said, yeah, I'm going to wait for him. He said, well, he said, the test takes about 3 or 4 hours. He said, why don't you just take the test with him and see once, instead of sitting here waiting, take the test. I said, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that. So I took the test. It was a multiple choice test. And I guess it took about 3 or 3.5 hours. And finished, give the sergeant the paper, and he said, I'll mark him a minute. And he just laid a copy on he could tell right away if you had the right answers. And so he was gone about 20 minutes, and he came out and he said, well, VanDyke, he said, you're in the Air Force? He said to the other kid, he said, you didn't pass. He said, you have to go back to your flash and sound battery. So I said, well, okay. So I went back to the battery head office, and I told them there, I said, I just passed the test for the Air Force. Yeah, they said, they notified us. They said, you're finished here. You'll just have to wait until you get called. And so they said, while you're waiting, he said, we'll let you do painting in the mess hall. After the mess hall closes in the evening, he said, then you can go and paint in the mess hall. So I think there was a couple other guys that had done the same thing I did. And so then with the 3 of us, about 6 or 6:30, we'd go in the mess hall and paint until about 3 in the morning, and then we go back to our barracks, and because that's about the time the KP guys had to get up and get to the mess hall. So then we just laid around the rest of the day until 6 at night, and then I think that went on for maybe 2 weeks or something like that, I guess. And then I got called to the Air Force, to the reception center, and we got on a bus, and they took us to Wichita Falls, Texas, Shepherd's Field. And there I was assigned to a a couple barracks full of guys waiting to go to college. And so then I laid around there, I guess it must have been, well, I know it was the 1st of September when we went to Manhattan, Kansas. We went to Kansas State College because I knew school was just starting. So, and I guess it was about May or June that I had gone to Shepherd Field. So I laid there most of the summer just drilling and not doing anything. Well, then finally we got called, our barracks got called to Manhattan, Kansas, at Kansas State College. And then I went to college there for 3 months. It was from September until I think it was just before, right after Thanksgiving. Then we got on a troop train. We went to Santa Ana, California, to be tested for what we wanted, either pilot, navigator, or bombardier.
You did a little bit of flight training while you were at Kansas.
Yeah, while we were in Kansas, we got 10 hours of flight training on a Piper Cub. And so that's the closest I ever got. The first time I ever got near an airplane is when we went to Kansas to fly.
First time you were in an airplane, somebody was telling you to fly it.
First time I was in an airplane, right near an airplane. So it was about, I guess, my 3rd hour or something like that. The instructor said, well, VanDyke, he said, you're going to land the plane today. So I said, okay. So we came in for landing, and when we were, I pulled back on the throttle and pulled the nose down of the airplane, and I thought, well, we're just about ready to hit the ground. So then I was going to pull back on the stick and put the throttle forward, and the instructor grabbed the stick and he said, what you trying to do, kill us? He said, we're still 50 feet off the ground. And that's when I found out I have poor depth perception. But that didn't matter. I took the rest of my flight training at 10 hours. And then when we got to Santa Ana, California, then we went through a lot of tests to see what we were qualified for. And that's where I found out again that I had bad depth perception, because I couldn't line up those sticks on that board. I couldn't line those sticks up. And I know that guy that was in charge said to me, oh, you can do better than that. And I said, no. I said, I think they're pretty well lined up. He said, no. He said, they're not lined up at all. But anyway, I passed. So then I knew I couldn't make it as a pilot. And I really didn't want to be a pilot either. So I qualified for navigator or bombardier, and I chose to be a bombardier. And so then in Santa Ana, I had to go through all pre-flight again. It was another basic training, but then it was all for the Air Force and for bombardier. But mostly it was taking tests and drilling and firing on the rifle range. And so then I was in Santa Ana until, it was just before, it was right after Thanksgiving. We went to Santa Ana, and I was in Santa Ana, I think, until March or April of 44. And then I started my bombardier training, and I think that lasted at least 16 or 18 weeks. And then when you graduated from bombardier school, you did quite a bit of flying. And then we flew with in an AT-6. And then there was a pilot and then 2 cadets. And then one cadet would drop the bombs and the other cadet would be in the back taking pictures. And then when a bomb hit, a little puff of smoke would go up, and you had the guy in the back had to shoot to get that. So you couldn't start the camera too quick, because if you wasted too much film, you had to have enough film. They give you so much film, and you had to use that film so that you could get his 5 bombs and your 5 bombs on it. And to graduate, you had to have be within 150 feet of the bullseye on the round circle target. And so then I graduated in September. I passed that, and then I was commissioned a flight officer. They made half the class second lieutenants and half the class flight officers. And they told us, as a flight officer, within the next 2 or 3 months, you would be commissioned as a second lieutenant. And then after I graduated from Bombardier school, I had got my first furlough. I was in the Army for 20 months before I got to go home for the first time. And I got a 7-day leave, and I had to report back to Lincoln, Nebraska. And at Lincoln, Nebraska, we got there, and they said, you can go home again if you want to, because we're not set up for any doing anything for at least another month. So then I went home again. Well, in Lincoln, Nebraska, bombardiers, navigators, pilots, gunners, radar operators, when they got through with their schooling, they all went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's where they made up crews. And that's where I was assigned my crew. And I got a paper with all the guys on my crew, and I went around, I met them all, and I think it was about that was in 44. I graduated at a Bombardier school in September. I think it was November that we all went to combat crew training in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And that's where they had all these old beat up B-29s they were all worn out. I know when we got to Alamogordo, there were a couple crashed B-29s laying along the runway. And then we took combat crew training there until March. And but we really didn't get to fly much, because you would report to the flight line, and they would say, okay, Gilbert, that was my pilot's name, Gilbert's crew is going to fly on number so-and-so. Well, all our crew would all walk over to that plane. Well, you'd get to that plane, and all the engines would be out of it. So you just sit around there for the flight, for your time, and then you'd go back to your barracks again. But we did get in some training. We did get in some flying time, and the last flight we did at Alamogordo was a 3,000-mile flight, because they told us that's how long your missions were going to be. So we did get an airplane that was good enough to fly, and then we flew to Los Angeles and out into the ocean, and then back again to Alamogordo. And that was the end of our combat crew training. I know at one of them combat crew training flights, we were going to go up to 30,000 feet and practice shooting the guns. And that plane we were in, it wouldn't make 30,000. The pilot couldn't get it up to 30,000. So he had to call in the tower and say, we can't get to 30,000 feet. He said, so they said, well, just shoot the guns at where you were. I think we were about 28,000, something like that. So, those planes, they were worn out, and all they did was half the time you couldn't fly them, but we did get some time in, and then they told us that a certain day we were going to go to ship out, we were going to go to Kearney, Nebraska, and then I called my girlfriend. I said, we're leaving. We're going to Kearney, Nebraska. And she said, then I'm going to come out there and see you. I said, no use you coming out here to see me. I said, we probably will be gone. Well, she said, I'm going to come anyway. So it's lucky for her that we did stay at Kearney longer than I thought we were, because I didn't know we were going to pick up a new airplane there and calibrate the instruments. But anyway, she came, and I think she got there about 3 or 4 days before we left. And she was 19 and I was 20. And I don't know who suggested it, or why don't we get married now that you're here? Why don't we get married while we're at it? You know, kids, that's kids thinking. And so we went to talk to the chaplain, and he said, I'll marry you. So the day before we were going to ship out, that afternoon, we went to the chaplain, to the little chapel there, and the chaplain married us. And it just so happened that our flight engineer, he was married, and his wife had come out to see him off too. And so him and Tom Prim and his wife stood up with us, and we got married in the afternoon. And I guess it was maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. One of the co-pilot, you had to have points to get meat, and he called, or I don't know, but anyway, he had got points from his mother, and so we could have a steak dinner at the PX at the base at Kearney. And so then our crew, we had a nice steak dinner, and we sat around and talked, and I guess it was maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night. We, of course, were restricted to the base since we were leaving in the morning. So I kissed my wife goodbye. She went to the hotel. I went to the barracks. The next morning, she went east. I went west. I didn't see her again until I got home, discharged from the Air Force.
All right, so after you left the United States, you guys started flying west. What was that like?
We flew from Kearney, Nebraska to Mather Field in California. And then, of course, they ask, are your records all in order? Well, of course, my records were all had to be changed. So I guess I spent half a morning or afternoon there getting everything switched over, to my wife's name. Well, we were only in Sacramento for Mather Field for a couple of days. And another thing that happened in Sacramento, I wasn't in on it, but my pilot and our radar operator were. They went and bought a couple of cases of whiskey to take overseas with them. I didn't know that they did that, but now I'm finding out. I found out later from Carpenter, a lot of crews did that. They would get a couple of cases of whiskey, and then they would take that, put that on the plane so they'd have it when they got to Guam. Well, anyway, we took off. I know it was dark when we took off from Mather Field, and I know we flew all night, and we got to John Rogers Field in Hawaii. We landed there, and I guess we were there maybe 2 or 3 days. I know we got to go to Honolulu, and I was really disappointed when we got to Honolulu, we took a bus from our base into to town, and we got off the bus, and we stepped off the bus and we looked, and it looked like Monday morning, wash. All you saw was white uniforms, all them sailors with their white uniforms on. That Honolulu was jammed. So I guess we were only there an hour or so, and we said, let's get out of here. So then we went to the beach, and I think one of our gunners cut himself with coral, and he got an infection. I remember he had an infection. Well, anyway, then we left Hawaii, and I don't know if it's still that way, but the Dole Pineapple Company, their water tower is shaped like a big pineapple. And I know we flew right over the top of that pineapple. And then we flew from Hawaii to Kwajalein. And that's a little dinky little island. And you got the ocean on both sides of the runway. And I think we were only in Kwajalein overnight. Because then I think the next morning we took off. We couldn't open our orders after we left Matherfield until we were out about an hour. And so then the pilot opened the orders, and he said, we're going to go to Guam. And so then from Kwajalein, we flew to Guam. And the runways weren't hardly finished yet. I know not alongside the runways was still coral, gravel, and then we sat by our airplane, I guess, and it was hot. And we sat by the airplane, I guess, for an hour, and finally a truck came and picked us up. And in Guam, there were 5 officers and 6 enlisted men. Well, the officers stayed a little ways, maybe a couple blocks from where the enlisted men stayed. Yeah. And we dropped the enlisted men off, and then the truck took us to our barracks, and walked in the barracks, and them guys, they were not too happy because we replaced their buddies who had gotten shot down.
And is that where your ground crew came from also? Because you guys were one of the few planes that you didn't get assigned your ground crew until you got.
We got the ground crew from the crew that got shot down. We got their ground crew.
So you guys were true replacements.
Yeah, we were, because the ground crew that we got, the colonel, who was the commanding officer of our squadron, he was one of the pilots that got shot down. And so that crew was pretty depressed when we walked in. Of course, here we come in 5 cocky guys, we're going to win the war and all. And, and them guys were kind of down. But it only took about a couple of weeks, and then we got to know them guys pretty good. So then we got to be friends with them. And
I know crews are tight, and ground crews get to be just as much a part of the crew almost. I mean, there's that relationship there between you guys and your ground crew that's just different from other areas of the service. It's a large group of guys whose whole mission is one airplane.
Yeah, the ground crew guys stayed in different Quonset huts than the crew members that flew. Our enlisted men stayed in a larger Quonset hut than we did. They stayed in a Quonset hut with three crew of enlisted men from 3 planes, where we stayed in a Quonset hut with only 2, our crew and one other crew, the officers of one other crew.
What was daily life on Guam like when you weren't flying?
Well, it was like I said, the runways were hardly finished, and I know the Quonset huts were up, but the mess hall was in a tent. When we first got there, we ate our meals in a tent because they were building all new buildings, and I know shortly after we got there, they built a great big mess hall. And they built another place where we could take a shower. It was a kind of a big square building with shower heads all set around. And
before that, you guys had an outdoor shower, right?
What?
You had an outdoor shower.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But what I used to do is I'd wait until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I'd quick run out, and then I'd pull the shower, and I'd get hot water, and then I'd run to the next shower and get hot water. Well, more guys did that too, but that way you could get a warm shower because the water was all in the pipes, you know. So, and then they built a new mess hall. We were only there, I would say, only maybe a month, and then the new mess hall was finished, and the new showers. They got the new showers. But I know when we first got there, in back of the Quonset hut, there was a board with the holes cut in, and then you could take your helmet and put your helmet in there and use that like a sink, and then you could wash and shave. And there was, but then that all changed too. Then they got better bathroom facilities. They did a lot of building. The Seabees did that. They built it. I know our crew and another crew, we bought a wash machine from the Seabees, and we had our own wash machine in our barracks that we could do our own washing. And I think we had a Jeep that we bought from the Seabees. Yeah, I know we had a Jeep. We had a Jeep by the. So, but with eating, we all ate together. You went to the mess hall, and no matter where you sat or anything, but down way at the other end of the island, the Navy was a big Navy base, and they had a lot of ships that were anchored there, and they had a big Quonset hut. And you could get beer and drinks there. I know you could get a drink for $0.25, and I forget what. Well, when we went, we'd always buy a case of beer, and then we'd go and sit outside under a tree and drink the beer. But then we got to know some of these Navy officers. We got to know them guys. They were pilots on some of them little aircraft carriers, and then they said. When you guys fly your missions, they said, you keep your eyes open for ships where they're anchored, he said, so that we can, when we're on duty, we can bomb them ships. But then they'd say, well, you want to come and eat by us tonight? We'd say, yeah. So we'd walk to the dock, and I remember one thing, them Navy officers said, take off, coxswain, you're loaded. And they would take off to the ship. And so then we'd get in, and them Navy officers all had a nice big round table that they'd sit by a round table, and then one of the mess hall guys would come and take their order.
Stewards.
Stewards, yeah. That was all new to us guys, you know, and then they say, well, why don't you stay for the movie tonight? And they'd get chairs out for us. They had it made. And then I know that one pilot, he said, come to my room. I have to go to my room a minute. And he walked in, and on his bunk, there lay a shirt, all pressed with a paper ribbon around it. Oh, he said, I see my laundry came back. I thought, if we sent our laundry in and we kept it in the barracks bag and we send it away and then it'd come back, they never take it out of the barracks bag. They just wash it in the barracks bag. Of course, those Navy guys they had it pretty good.
I read that you guys were so close that your enlisted crew that you actually started smuggling them into the Navy officers area.
Yeah, we thought that was so great, and then we only did it a couple times, and then we say to a couple of the enlisted guys, we're going to go tonight. We got invited to the Navy. Why don't you go with us? We'll put a bar on you, and then you tell them that you're Lieutenant so and so, and so we did that a couple of times. They really liked that too. But
there's a long way to build camaraderie in a crew. Little things like that.
Yeah, but you live with them guys, you sleep with them guys, you're in the airplane with them, and you get real close to those guys. And we had a good crew of guys, except our tail gunner. He was a loner. He wanted to be by himself. When most of the crews, when they would take off and go towards the target, it took 6 hours to get to the target. Well, the tail gunner would come and sit with the other gunners, but Washam, our gunner, the minute we took off, by the time we took off, he was in the tail, and it's where he stayed the whole time. He never got out of the tail. He just always wanted to be by himself.
Who were the members of your crew? Really quickly, if you just want to go through the names of the members of your crew.
Okay, there was me in the nose, and then there was Gilbert the pilot. He was the airplane commander. He was in the left seat. Larry Bennett was the pilot. He sat in the right seat. And then right in back of them sat Tom Prim. He was the flight engineer. He had a little compartment where all the instruments were. That's where he sat. And then in back of him, just back of him a little ways, was Ken Hurley. He was the navigator. And alongside of Ken, on the other side of him, was Joe Laban. He was the radio operator. And then you went through the tunnel, and then the central fire control gunner, who sat like on a barber chair, he could look through the top of the plane, and he had 360-degree view. That was Ted Lewis. He's the only other guy that's still living. He lives in Florida. And then the left side gunner was Washam, or Chum Bohr, Wenzel Bohr, his name, Wenzel. And on the other side was Norm Whipple. And then in back of them in the little compartment was Pop Carpenter. He was the oldest guy on the crew. He was the radar operator. And then way in the tail was Bob Washam. He was the tail gunner. Pop was 26, and he was the old man. And I think Gilbert and Prim were 22, and I was 20, 21, and Norm Whipple was, I think, 21. Ted Lewis was 19, and Bohr was 20, and Joe Laban was 20. So most of the crew were early 20s. Like Lewis and Bohr, they were 18 and 19. And then there was quite a few of us were just 20 or 21. And then Gilbert and Prim were 22 or 23, and Pop was 26. And that's why we all called him Pop. He was the old man.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of brain. I mean, he had old man sense. You might say, us kids, we didn't see no danger, but he did. he was married and had a young girl, a young daughter, and he was very well. With age, I would say he was that age that he knew better.
Wise man.
Yeah, he had been married for a while, and he knew married life, and he was a good guy. In fact, we went on after the war. We went on a lot of vacations with him. We went to see Orley in Washington, and we went to Canada a couple times. We got along good with Pop and Mary. They'd come over to our house, or we'd go to their house. They were good, but.
So when you guys named your plane, how did the name Sentimental Journey come about?
Well, first of all, that was a popular song at the time, going to take a sentimental journey, and it was mostly the enlisted men. They got together, and I really wasn't concerned about the name. I mean, I had just gotten married, and my thoughts was get the war over with and get home. But the enlisted men, they said, boy, that would be a nice name, because when we got to Guam, we noticed that a lot of the airplanes were painted with names on. And the way those names got painted, they were enlisted men that knew how to paint. And then they would charge you to put the name on the airplane. So evidently the enlisted men said to Gilbert, our airplane commander, how about the name Sentimental Journey? Well, then none of us officers had any. Well, they said, yeah, that's good, because everybody was singing that song at the time. So the enlisted man knew another enlisted man from another crew or a ground crew that was a painter that could do that kind of. So they hired him, and then I think we all had to chip in. If I'm not mistaken, we all had to chip in $10, and then they said, will you guys all chip in $10 to have it painted? And so we said, I said, yeah. I said, I'll pay it. And then evidently one of the guys said, well, why don't we have our girlfriend's name painted where we sit? So I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea too. So then they had that guy painted our names. That's how the name got, Sentimental Journey got. Like, I know one plane, the name was Old Smoker, and one was 10 Under Par, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, you couldn't paint them sexy women on. They frowned upon that, because some of them planes, during the war, would go home to the States. These guys would go to learn to be lead crew, and then they said some of them ladies in the States would see them airplanes with all them half-naked women on. They wouldn't like that, so it was kind of frowned upon to put. But then on the right-hand side of the plane was a big picture, a big painting of America, of the United States. And then we all had to name our airplane after a city in America, because they figured that was good publicity if, like the name of the city of Los Angeles, well, then the city of Los Angeles would bond around that plane and that crew. And so then by the time we came, since we were a replacement crew, we had three of the guys on our crew were from around the Philadelphia area, and a couple of the other ones were within a short radius of Philadelphia. And they said, well, city of Philadelphia. And so then we decided on city of Philadelphia, and then we found out that that name was taken. And so then they said, well, another name for Philadelphia is Quaker City. And so they said, well, let's name it City of Quaker City. So then they said, yeah, you could do that. So on the right-hand side of the plane was, all the planes had that same symbol, a big round circle with United States in there, and then a flag painted where that city was. And then that's how the name City of Philadelphia. And I know we got a nice letter from the mayor of Philadelphia that thanking us for naming our plane City of Quaker City. But I know a lot of the planes, the smaller cities like Chattanooga and Las Vegas, and those cities would send those crews a big basket every so often of fruit or sandwiches, or like bologna, and they would send them crews would get a big basket from some of them cities. But we never got anything from Quaker City, just a letter. So,
LeMay had recently taken over the bomb wings there, and how did he change things right as you guys were coming in? Because I know there was a major shift in the way things were done.
Oh yeah, when LeMay took over, he said, you guys are going to go in much lower, because the planes, first, they were flying from China first, bombing them, some of them Japanese strongholds. And they were flying at 30-some thousand feet, and they weren't hitting anything. They didn't know about the jet stream at that time. And so when LeMay took over, he said, you guys are going to go in at between 10 and 14,000 feet, and you're going to start hitting some of those targets. And some of the higher ups in the Army said, you're going to lose all the planes. You're going to lose all your airplanes. They're all going to get shot down. He said, well, LeMay said, they have to start hitting something. They're not hitting anything at 30-some thousand feet. And so then he found out that by going in much lower, we were wiping them oil refineries out and those airfields. And that's why the Japanese couldn't put up many fighters against us towards the end, because they didn't have the fuel. I know when we first got there was a lot more fighter action, and because I know some of them crews, they had said going in at that altitude, we're never going to make 25 missions. We'll get shot down before then. And before we got there, the 330th group were losing quite a few planes, because, well, that crew that got shot down, whose place we took, I think they got shot down on their second mission. And by the end of the war, as being a replacement crew, we had just as many or more missions than some of the original crews that were there. I think, if I remember right, there's only one crew that made 30 missions, and that was just before the end of the war. That crew could come back home. Their time mission quota was up. So we, even as a replacement crew, we got just about as many missions in, and sometimes more than the original group did.
And B-29 was quite a challenge to fly. So,
Oh, yeah.
especially out of Guam. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Just,
It was, we got a good airplane. Well, I didn't realize we were going to pick up an airplane at Kearney Field, but we so happened we got a real good airplane that we got good gas mileage and everything was good about it. But Gilbert, he had no trouble flying. We never had any airplane trouble. I think of the 24 missions that we flew, I think we only had a abort twice. And on one of those missions, it started on takeoff already. I used to sweat them takeoffs out because you were loaded with bombs and gasoline. And the maximum load was, I always remember that, the maximum load weight was 132,000 pounds. That was maximum. And we were always over that, a little bit over that. Well, one of the things they had trouble with the B-29 was overheating. I remember that a lot of them planes, they would get ready to take off, they'd be overheated. And to take off, you had a runway that was just long enough, because it took a long runway to get up enough airspeed to get into the air. But we had like I said, we had a good airplane. It was easy to fly. We never had any mechanical trouble with it. Everything worked perfect. And then I always said, I know a lot of the bombardiers on takeoff would go and sit in the back with the gunners. But I always sat right in the nose. I'm sitting right here looking at the runway, taking off, bouncing along, and I'm hearing Bennett say to Gilbert, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100, and then I knew the wheels I could feel the wheels come up off the ground. Well, then we'd only fly real low, and then we'd come to the end of the runway, and then the end of the ground, there was a 200-foot cliff. Well, we'd get over that cliff, and Gilbert could put the nose down, and then if you'd stand at the end of the runway and watch them planes, you'd see that plane go, and then they would disappear, and then they would go down, and they'd get the flaps up, and then they'd slowly on, you'd see them come back up again. Well, that one mission we flew, I noticed right off the bat, as soon as we got in the air, that Gilbert and the engineer Prim were talking back and forth on the intercom, and I knew something was wrong. And we only flew, I guess, about a half hour, and then Prim said, we have to turn around and go back. So then I had to drop the bombs in the ocean, and then we circled back and came in. Well, if you abort a mission, you have to have a good reason why you aborted. And so we landed, and they checked the engine, and they found out that one engine, the spark plug had blown out. Well, naturally, right away, the colonel, he says, well, you didn't have that spark plug in there tight. It wasn't screwed down tight. Well, the ground crew guy said, I know it was. I know it was. And so our ground crew, the three of them, walked along the runway, and they found that spark plug. And they found out it had defective threads on it, that it wasn't their fault, that the threads, they did not screw in right into that piston. And so then the colonel said, well, they showed the colonel, they said, well, here's the spark plug, we found it. And so but I forget what the other one, what the other abortion was. I forget, but there was a lot of abortion, that the engines would heat up, or this would be wrong, or that would be wrong.
It
But
wasn't uncommon to have a crash at the end of that run.
yeah, then sometime you'd be in line, and then you'd see a big cloud of black smoke. Well, that plane never, the engine, something went wrong with the engine, and they crashed, and yeah, that's what. But we, like I say, we had a good airplane, never had a bit of trouble with it, and so then after we got in the air about maybe an hour or so, then I'd have to go back into the bomb bay, and there's two safeties on the bombs. There's like a propeller and a shaft and a propeller on the end. And there's two holes drilled in that shaft. Well, that one, I would go back and take that one pin out. So there would be one pin left on, and that was by a wire that was hooked onto the shackle, so that when you dropped the bomb, that wire stayed there, and then that second wire would stay in the plane, and then the propeller would start spinning, and then it would spin so often it would fly off. Well, then the bomb would be armed, and so it'd be ready to go. Well, so on our first, I think it was our first mission, that was for a Japanese airfield. That was on Kyushu. That was on the little island. Like, Japan is made up of three islands.
Matsushima
Honshu,
Station.
Kyushu, and Honshu, and we never bombed that northernmost island. We never went up there. Well, because most of the big cities are on Honshu. But anyway, this was an airfield, and I think it was a naval airfield.
Yeah, Matsuyama. It was Matsuyama.
Right.
On 4 May.
Well, to go back, on day missions, naturally you can't fly in formation for 6 hours. So we would take off every 50 seconds. A plane would take off, and you would fly individually to a point that the navigator was told, to a certain point on the coast of Japan, and the lead crew would get to that point. He would drop his nose wheel and circle. And so you would, when you got close to that plane with the nose wheel down, you knew you got in formation with him. One guy would get on the left wing of him, and the other on the right wing, and then the fourth plane would get in the slot in back of the lead plane, but above, so he wouldn't get in the prop wash. And then when you got 4 planes, then you would go to your initial point. Well, so then we got the first mission. We were tense, of course, and we didn't know what we were going to run into. And well, anyway, we saw that plane with the nose wheel down, and we circled and got in formation, and we went. And I'm watching that lead plane, and pretty soon he opens his bomb bay doors, and I don't even think I'm looking at the bomb sight. I'm looking down, and I'm seeing all them Japanese soldiers running around, and there was a whole line of airplanes lined up, and none of them were taking off. And I saw the lead plane drop his bomb, so I dropped my bombs, and then we flew formation to the coast of Japan. And then we broke up, and then we flew back individual. Well, when we left the coast of Japan, I would say either I would go, the 2 bomb bays, they had a door with a glass. It was about that big around that you could look into the bomb bay and see. And I would go back to the first bomb bay and I'd check, and then I would say to Bohr or Whipple, I'd say, Bohr, check the back bomb bay. And so he went back, he came back and he said, that bomb bay is clear. I said, okay, good. So we flew all the way back to Guam and came in for a landing and went and landed, and we landed. And when you land, then I'd open the bomb bay doors, and then the ground crew would come. And I noticed, got out of the airplane, and the ground crew came, and all of a sudden they scattered. They all ran away. What's the matter? Well, they said there's a 250-pound bomb hanging up there yet. So, oh no. So I said to Bohr, I said, I thought you said the bomb bay was clear. Yeah, he said, I guess I didn't look good enough. You know, first mission, and so then Gilbert, the pilot, he chewed Bohr out. He said, don't you ever let that happen again. So it never did happen again, but over one of the missions, we flew over came away from a target, and I don't even know if it was a night mission or a day mission. Well, I thought, well, I'll go back and check the bomb bay. There was a bomb hanging in there. So I went back and I opened the bomb bay doors, I hit every switch that there was, salvo, individual, and I think it was Joe, the radio operator. No, it's still up there. He said, it's still up there. I thought, oh, brother, I'm going to have to go out there. Well, you know how them airplanes are rounded. Well, them racks are on the top of the airplane, they're down, and then them shackles hang on there, and the bombs hang on the shackles. Well, there's a little walkway between the rack and the outside shell of the airplane. It's about 8 inches wide, I guess. And you can't go in there with a parachute on because you can't get by the racks. And so I took my parachute off with a screwdriver. Bomb bay doors are open. So I get out there, open that door, and I get out there, and I'm looking. There's nothing but ocean down there. And I'm hanging on to the rack, and I'm looking up at that bomb, and I inched my way along to that, so I was just by that bomb, and I stuck that screwdriver up in that slot there, and I'm wiggling, and nothing happened, and I wiggle and wiggle, and finally, whoosh, that bomb dropped. And I inched my way back in, and the crew on the intercom are all saying, is Duke in yet? Is Duke in the plane yet? Is Duke in the plane yet? Finally, Joe said, oh yeah, he's in. So I closed that door. Boy, that was a scary day, time, I know that. And I talked to other guys that had done it too, and they said, oh man, that's scary. That's really scary. But that was the only time that we couldn't drop all of our bombs. That one hung up there, and we flew all the way back with it. But then that other one, I had to stick that screwdriver in there. And another thing, we used to have to fly through a lot of fronts. Weather fronts. Sometimes we'd fly for an hour and you couldn't even see the end of the nose of the airplane. Well, this one night mission, it's still the scariest, I think that's the scariest mission I was ever on. It started raining and it was green rain. When the rain would hit the nose of the airplane, it would splash. And it would be all green. And I looked out at the engines, and they were nothing but four great big green circles. And that rain would be coming down on the nose of the airplane, and all that green would be splashing all over. And the front, on the nose of the plane, they got what they call a pitot tube. It's a little tube. It's only about as big as your face. So it sticks out of the nose about that far. Well, at the end of that tube, there was a flame. I'd say it was about a yard long, a green flame zigzagging off in the end of that. That was the spookiest plane mission that I ever remember, and it was quite near the coast of Japan. And the way the weatherman said, it was so much phosphorus in the water that it made that green rain. And one of the ladies that sits at our table here, I was telling them about it, and she said, I'm going to ask my daughter about that. She's a meteorologist. And Jody came back the other day and said to me, she said, yeah, my daughter said there is such a thing as green rain. So I said, well, I wasn't dreaming about it then, but that was so spooky. You can't imagine. It was all green. And but it didn't last too long. Oh, maybe a half hour, I guess, something like that. And then we were out of it. And but like I say, flying to and from the coast, you hit a lot of weather. I know one day mission, we were flying along, and there's a great big thunderhead in front of us. And I'm sitting in the nose, and Bennett's flying the plane. I guess Gilbert's sleeping. And I pointed out to Bennett. I said, go around. He said, going through. And so we hit that big thunderhead, and bang, a big flash of fire flew right through the airplane. And our Pop Carpenter, he was so mad. He said, I'm going to shoot Bennett. He said he was so mad that big flame, we could have just as well flown around that thunderhead, but no, Bennett said we're going through it. We got hit, but luckily nothing happened. The fire was gone, and we kept on it going. But that was the way Bennett was. He had his own opinion. You didn't tell him what to do. He said, we're going to go through. So we did. And then on another mission, I think it was over Kobe. It was a night mission, and there was a great big cloud of smoke going up, and the town was burning, and there was a lot of flak that night, a really lot of flak. And Gilbert's flying. I said to Gilbert, get in that cloud of smoke. So he pointed the plane, and we hit that cloud of smoke. And we no more than hit that cloud of smoke, and something hit me in the chin. Well, they had what we call flak suits. Actually, it's like an apron, a metal, I guess it was about an inch thick. And you laid that on your lap, like I'd lay it on my lap. And then it came up a little ways. It really wasn't much protection, but I always put it on anyway. And what happened is, I looked at the altimeter. We had dropped 2,000 feet, just like that. And that flak suit had come up and hit me in my chin. And I thought I got hit, but it must have been that flak suit flipped up and hit me in the chin. And then on another mission, Lewis was telling me about that after we got back, that Whipple we were flying along, and there was quite a bit of flak, and all of a sudden Whipple said, "Oh, I'm hit," and his flight suit was all red. And Lewis said he got down off in his barber chair, and he looked, and what had happened, Whipple had been drinking some tomato juice, and that had spilled all over his pants. He thought he had got hit, but he didn't get hit. But we did have a lot of flak, and especially that one mission over Yokohama. I think it was just before we were going to drop our bombs, and all of a sudden the sky just turned black. And I thought, oh no, we got to go through that. And we kept on going. We got that flak, and that's when I saw a lot of pieces of different airplanes flying off that got hit by flak. And but we made it through it okay, and we could hear the flak hitting our plane, but we didn't get any holes. But except for that one mission, Carpenter was very quiet. Carpenter never said anything on the missions, and he sat there in that little compartment all by himself with his radar, and we hit a lot of flak that day. I don't know what mission it was, and we got out over the ocean, and Carpenter said, "Well," he said, "I got a window now." "What?" He said, "I got a window now." He said, "Right above my head." And a big piece of flak had gone right just about 4 inches above his head. There was a hole in the airplane where that flak had gone through the plane above his head, but we never did find that piece of flak. I don't know whatever happened to that flak. Maybe one of the ground crew found it.
Yeah, I had read that Pop had always complained that he was the only officer in the airplane without a window.
Yeah, he always said that. "I don't have a window." He said, "I can't see anything. I don't have a window."
And he didn't think it was fair because he was the oldest and he should have a window too.
Yeah, right. No, he didn't have. But everything, it was the same thing. Night missions or day missions. You come back from the mess hall, you'd stop by the bulletin board, and you'd look, and it would say strikes, and then it would say following crews, and there would be maybe 15 crew names with a pilot's name. And I'd look, and yeah, Gilbert's name would be on it. And they always give you a day, probably a day notice. They would say, Tuesday afternoon, 4:00, meet at the group headquarters, and all the crews that were listed would meet. And we'd all sit in a room, and they'd say what target we were going to hit that night or that day. And then they would tell us what they figured the weather was going to be like. And then we would split up. Bombardiers would go to one place, pilots, navigators, gunners. And then they'd tell us bombardiers what altitude we'll be flying at, what kind of bombs we're going to be dropping, what the airspeed probably will be. And so I'd have that all written down. And then on a night mission, we flew separate. And we would take off, we would fly to our initial point, which was usually Mount Fujiyama, because you could see Mount Fujiyama for a long ways. But another thing I realized, not too long ago, I realized that you didn't know whether you were flying over water or land, because that island of Japan was completely blacked out. There was not a light on the ground. So you would have to just, sometimes you could see Mount Fujiano on a hour before we even hit the coast because it stood out like a sore thumb. And then we would fly to Fujiyama, and then I would give the pilot the heading to the target. It was Nagasaki or Kobe or Tokyo or Yokohama. I'd give the heading, and he'd go toward that heading. But I wouldn't even have to give him the heading because you'd look ahead and you'd see maybe 50 or 100 miles away, you'd see all the fire of the city burning. So you knew that's where you had to go to. So you just went to the where the fire was, and because the plane, they'd send out planes before the mission. They would send out planes to light to get the fire going on the cities, and then so there would always be a fire going, and then they would put high explosive bombs in maybe every 10 or 15 plane, and then the other planes would drop fire bombs, but then that one plane that had the high explosives, he would drop high explosives, and then that would explode, and that would scatter the fire more and more. And then you could see, as you came up to the target, you could see them searchlights going across the sky. They just back and forth. And that one night over Tokyo, we were flying along, and all of a sudden that searchlight got us. And just like that, about 6 or 7 other ones down the ground, they must have been synchronized. They came on our plane too, and it was just like daylight. I could have read a newspaper that was so light in the airplane. And Joe was back there by the camera hatch with the rope that was a round aluminum, about a ½ inch wide, a big roll of that he would throw that out, and when that would go down, then the searchlights would go onto that rope instead of our plane.
That would bust apart, and it was full of basically like an anti. It would shine. It was like aluminum foil.
Yeah, that aluminum. Yeah, and it would be unrolling. All them rolled, and then I said to Joe, I said, "Throw out the rope, Joe." And okay, and instead of throwing out a roll that time, he threw the whole box out. And when we landed, in the morning when we landed, the whole back of the airplane was all full of like Christmas tinsel hanging down. A lot of that rope flew back into the plane, but usually it went pretty well. So.
There was one night mission in particular where you guys almost went head on with another plane. Can you explain what happened with that?
Right. We were on our way to the target, and we were getting fairly close, and all of a sudden we were going towards the target, and we met this other plane coming right toward us. And I thought, wonder what's going on with him. Well, evidently, he must have figured, well, I'm close enough to the target. I'm going to drop my bombs, and I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to go back out the same way I came in. And he was only a little ways away from us, and Joe, we had a powerful searchlight that we could use. And Joe said, shall I shine that light on him and get his number? And Pop said, don't you dare to shine your light on him. He said, he might shoot us down. He said, if you put the light on him. So we never did find out. Evidently what it was is they must have chickened out that they got so close, and they said, well, we're not going to go in any further. But I don't know why he would have came out the way he went in. It seems to me he would have gone and taken a different route out, But I imagine there was more of that went on, because I know a couple of them raids over Tokyo were kind of rough, but we made it all right. So
Can you tell me about the one time you guys did encounter a military airplane, one of the Japanese fighters? So you had one incident where you guys
one on one of the missions, there it was a day mission, and we got in formation on the coast of Japan, and like I said, you had to get in formation quick because you had to save gasoline. And so this one crew, I think they only had 3 or 4 missions in. We were supposed to be on the right wing of the lead airplane, and this plane was supposed to be in the slot. Well, getting into formation, he went into on the right wing of the lead plane, and Gilbert figured, well, he's there now, let him be there. He said, we'll just get in the slot so we can take off and get on our mission. And so we went in with the 4 planes, the lead plane, 1 on each wing, and we were in the slot and back of the lead plane up a little bit higher than the other planes, so you wouldn't get in that prop wash. And we were flying along, and it was a beautiful sunny day. I remember that. It was a nice sunny day. And all of a sudden, something flashed by the nose of our plane. And I thought, wonder what in the world that was. And we've kept on flying, and it was maybe 30 seconds, maybe a little bit less than that plane on the right wing dropped out of formation. He dropped down like that. And I kept looking, I thought, that's funny. And just about that time, 5 guys, the 5 guys in the back of the plane, they started jumping. And I saw 5 parachutes and nothing out of the front, no chutes out of the front. And finally that plane went down into a dive, and it swirled down, and I watched it crash and blew up. And then I realized that I saw that fighter plane come around and shoot those 5 guys in the parachute. I saw that fighter plane shoot them 5 guys, kill them 5 guys. So that was that fighter plane had come out of the sun. Nobody saw him. He was up above us. He must have come right out of the sun and went right over the nose of our plane into this guy over here on the right. And he must have either killed or wounded or did something to all them 6 guys in the front of the plane, because we were all like the Bombardier pilot, co-pilot, engineer, navigator, radar. They're all within a little area. If he had a 20 millimeter that exploded in there, they could have killed him or knocked him out. But anyway, none of them guys got out. Them 6 guys all went down with the plane. And that plane was in our position where we should have been. So, but another thing I forgot to say is, after we had our briefing, then a lot of us, most of us, went to the mess hall, and then we would go and eat, and then we would get on a truck, and that truck would take us to our airplane, because we weren't near the airplanes. I'd say the airplanes were maybe 2 miles away from where we were. And so then we would all get out of the truck, and we'd put our stuff in the plane, and then we had to pull the props. You get about 4 guys on the end of a prop. You'd have to pull that prop, and until you did 12 turns of the propeller, and then you do the next one, and then you do the next, and then we'd sit around talking, and one thing I did, I was brought up in a religious family, and I would always go into the airplane by myself, and I'd pray. And then I'd come out of the airplane, and no, they never said anything. Anybody said, well, where'd you go? What'd you do? But I think that it was the Lord that led me through all these missions. So, and that's why he brought me safely back. So, but it was and then when the war ended, we were on a mission. We were coming back from a mission, and it came on the radio that we had just dropped a bomb, and they couldn't explain it. It was so bad, and we got back, and we were listening. It was the atomic bomb, and then we didn't know anything about that. It was all a secret to us about that atomic bomb. And then they had said that Hiroshima had been wiped out, and then a couple days later, they dropped another one on Nagasaki. And after the war was over, a crew that had gotten shot down was being liberated. They were going out of Japan back home, and they stopped on Guam to say hi to some of the guys that one guy, I know his last name was Ross. He told me, he said, after they dropped that bomb on Hiroshima, he said they took a bunch of us prisoners, they blindfolded us and took us to Hiroshima. And he said, then they took the blindfold off of us, and we could see what had happened. And he said, then they made us bend down, and they laid a sword on our neck. And he said, we all figured they were going to chop our head off. But he said then they took the swords off and put the blindfolds back on, and we went back to our camp. And I know after the war, I didn't have to go because they didn't need a bombardier. Then they loaded our bomb bays up with supplies, and then they would fly with a skeleton crew, like just a pilot and navigator and a couple of maybe a couple of gunners, and then they would have racks in the bomb bays, and then they would drop them racks, and then that guy, that Ross said, when they dropped them supplies, he said all them Japanese guards would run for those supplies. He said, and we'd chase them away. We'd say, get out of there. Them are not for you, them are for us. And he said some of the guards just opened the doors of the prison. They just walked away. They were done.
Can you tell me about the mission where you guys earned the Distinguished Flying Cross? Because we haven't covered that yet. And that was the mission to Tokyo. I think it was your.
Yeah, I think it was a mission to Tokyo. Well, this was a mission to Tokyo, but it was on the outskirts of Tokyo. It was an engine plant, and it was an all-out. Our whole group, the 3 squadrons, were all going to be in formation, and we were going to really hit that target. And so that we got in formation, and there was a whole line of airplanes. Here was 4, and back here was 4 more. Here's 4 more. Here's 4 more. And so we made a run on the target, and the colonel of the 459th was on that lead plane, and he said, no, he said, we didn't get lined up good. He said, we're going to go around again, and he said, then we're going to come back. So the bombardier can have a better look at the target. And so we flew over the target and made a big circle. All them planes made a big circle, and we came back. And as we were almost up to the target, he decided that we were going too fast. So he had to slow down. So that lead plane slowed down. Well, you can imagine when that 4 planes slowed up, the planes in back of them slowed up. Well, that was like a domino effect. By the time it got back to the planes in the back, the planes were all mixed up. All of a sudden, the plane in front of them, the stop is slowing up, and so you're going up or down, and the plane in front of us, the plane on our wing, he went up, and our tail of our plane went into his bomb bay, and it was about up to the ceiling. I could read the numbers on the bomb bay of that other plane. And we had an engine out. Number 3 engine was out, and ripped a big piece of our tail off. And finally, Gilbert got the plane to nose down that we got out of his bomb bay. And I was just praying that guy above us wouldn't drop his bombs, because they would have taken our whole nose off. But anyway, we had that mid-air collision with an engine out, and then we dropped out of formation and we went alone. And years later, some plane above had taken a picture of us all alone, and you could see how a piece of our tail was sliced off, and smoke was coming out of that number 3 engine. But we made that's the time we made it. We only went up to Iwo. We stopped at Iwo, and we had from the coast of Japan to Iwo. Every so often there was a submarine for planes that had a ditch. So we followed that line of submarines, and we got to Iwo. There were a lot of planes landing that day on Iwo, and we landed, and they had the bulldozers ready to bulldoze our plane off the runway back into the ocean. We said, no, save them. I guess somebody pulled the guns out. They said, no, you're not putting our airplane. Pushing our airplane into the ocean. They pushed it to the side, and then that's the night I stayed overnight in Iwo, and then they flew our ground crew from Guam up to Iwo to fix the engine and kind of to work on the tail as best they could until they got it back to Guam, and then Hurley wrote that up and sent it into headquarters for our Distinguished Flying Cross.
I read that entire mission and read that write-up. And you guys had taken a hit in your number 4, and your pilot had saved the number 4 engine, and then he took a hit in the number 3.
Two.
Knocked the number 3 out.
First one engine went out, but they got that started again, and then number 3 went out, and so then we were on. But we did have 2 engines out, but they got one started again.
And he was able to, and Iwo was a really short strip.
Yeah.
And so much of the rudder had been ripped off that the only way he had to control the airplane left or right was the throttles of the engine.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to turn the airplane like he normally did. He landed on that tiny strip.
At Iwo, yeah. It was like I say, we flew along by them submarines because some of the guys wanted to ditch, but Gilbert said no. He said Gilbert said whoever wants to jump can jump, but he said I'm going to try and fly the plane to Evo. But none of us, we all said we'll stick with the plane, and he made a good landing, and we made it back. But then we flew took another plane back to Guam, and
after you got the plane fixed and the war ended, you guys got to fly one more time over Japan. And what was
to Korea. We had to fly a show of force. After the war, we had to fly a show of force to Korea because Russia was starting to stick their nose into it. They were thinking about taking over Korea. So we had to fly a show of force to Seoul, Korea. That was an 18-hour flight that we were in the air for 18 hours. We flew up to the coast of Japan, and then we headed off to Korea. And then we flew over Seoul. But Seoul was only a little hick town by then. There was hardly any, not like it is today. So.
And when the surrender was signed on the Missouri?
Yeah, and then we had to fly. That was in September. We had to fly over the Missouri when they were going to sign the peace treaty. And Gilbert said, "Duke," he said, "keep your eyes open," he said, "because I don't want to hit another airplane. And we made it this far. I don't want to hit another airplane." And the sky was black with airplanes. It was just black. And I watched the Marines land on Japan then. They did that. They were doing that at the same time that they were going to sign the peace treaty. I saw them Marines in them landing craft go into the coast of Japan. And then I know Hurley's friend was in the Marines, and then after the war, he got to talk. The Marines came back to Guam, and then Hurley got to talk to him, and he told Hurley about how the Marines landed in Japan, and then Hurley said to him, to his buddy, he said, "Can you get me an M1 rifle?" "Yeah," he said, "I can get you a rifle." So he got Hurley a rifle, and Hurley put that in our airplane. He kind of hit it, and I got a parachute. I was going to have, they were made of silk. I was going to have that made into a wedding dress for my wife. And I hid that in the airplane. And when we landed, we were lucky. We flew our airplane back home. Hurley had that rifle hidden, and I had that parachute hidden. And we landed at Mather Field, had all our belongings in the Bombay, had 10 High Point men with us that got on in Guam. And we landed the airplane, stopped. Somebody out there said, everybody off the plane, get off, stand over here, right over here. Don't worry about your stuff. You will get your stuff. So we all got off the airplane, went and stood there. They hooked it up, and they towed it away. That's the last I saw of it. That was in 1945. That was the last I saw it until 1980. And I imagine somebody found that rifle and parachute by then, because they used our plane on the DO line. It was when we were having trouble with Russia. They were flying that DO line way up there in north of Canada. I think they named our airplane Dumbo. It was named after they had seven planes.
It was Dopey.
Dopey.
Yeah, Dopey. That's what they called it. Yeah.
Okay, Dopey, yeah. Yeah.
But so it was quite a shock to you guys when you were notified that they had found Sentimental Journey again.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
80s.
Yeah, Hurley spent 22 years in the Air Force, and he retired, and he got a job at Boeing. He had, I don't know how many hundred engineers working for him. And one day, one of the engineers at Boeing took a vacation in Arizona, and he went to look at the Peta Air Museum, and etched on right below where the pilot window was, it was etched Lieutenant Gilbert. And he came back to work, and he said to Hurley, he said, I went to the Peta Air Museum, he said, and they got a B-29 there. And he said, right below the pilot's window, there's an etching that says Lieutenant Gilbert. Well, Hurley said, that's the name of my pilot. And he said, Hurley, being in the Air Force for 20-some years, he knew every Air Force airplane had a number on it. And Hurley took an airplane and went to Peta Air Museum, found that B-29, and he found the number. And he said, that's our airplane. And he wrote every one of our crew a letter and said, they found Sentimental Journey. I think we should have a reunion of the guys and so Bennett, he was a good one for getting people together. And so he set up a motel, and he set up a couple dates. And so my wife and I and my grandson, he was 12 years old, we said, Jeff, you want to go with us? So he went with us, and we had a nice reunion. They took us out to that B-29, and we all looked for places that we knew there should be patches. And I right away looked at above Carpenter's window, and yeah, there was a patch there. So I knew that was our airplane. And so then we had a nice reunion there, and they let my grandson get on the plane and sit in the same seat that I sat in for all my missions.
So after that reunion, you guys, Sentimental Journey was in pretty rough shape at that point. So you guys started raising money and working to get it hangared and working to get it repainted. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, can I go back a little bit?
Absolutely.
Okay. When it was time for us the war's over, and the war's over, they signed the peace treaty in September. Well, now it's getting towards October, and the way they're discharging men from the Army is with points. You got so many points for the number of months you were in, and so many points for the time overseas, and so many points for missions. And well, anyway, it came time for our crew to go home. We were all in about the same amount of time, and we were lucky. We were going to get to take our airplane, the airplane we flew in. We were going to take that home, except our co-pilot Bennett. He had I think flown one more mission than we did as a replacement for a co-pilot that was sick on another plane. Well, he didn't fly home with us. We flew home with another co-pilot. Well, anyway, they came to pick us up and take us to our airplane, and there were 10 high point men standing there waiting that they were going to fly home with us. They were high point men from India, and that one had a cage with a parrot in it. And so they got on the plane, we took off, and we flew to Kwajalein, just long enough to refuel, and then to Hawaii. And then just before we got to Hawaii, we had a terrible thunderstorm. I know that was really bad. But anyway, we made it, and we landed back in Hawaii. And we were standing in line a couple mornings later and waiting for breakfast. And that cook was taking our order, and came to Gilbert, and he said, what do you want? Gilbert said, I want a dozen eggs. Okay, and so we went and stood there. And, a couple minutes later, here came that guy out. He said, who's the guy that wanted a dozen eggs? Oh, Gilbert said, I did. He gave Gilbert a dozen eggs. I guess he ate them all. Well, then we landed in Mather Field, and we went to the mess hall. And that mess hall, I never saw a mess hall like it. It had every kind of meat you wanted. It had pork chops, it had ham, it had steak, it had roast, everything. You could take your pick of whatever you wanted. It had milk, it had juice, everything. And so then we all had a good meal there, and then we were in Sacramento for, I guess we were there about 3 or 4 days. I remember I bought my wife a diamond wedding ring then at that time. I went to a jewelry store and I bought her a diamond, and the crew gave me a set of silverware. And it so happened that when I got home, my wife had bought the same set while I was gone. So we had 2 sets of silverware. Well, anyway, we got back home, and then we took a train. Well, I guess it took us a couple of days to get home, and we got to Chicago. And then I got off at Fort Sheridan. I went to Fort Sheridan, and I was there a few days, and then I took a train back home. The first time I saw my wife in, well, about 6 or 8 months. And now I think back, you don't think I think back, why didn't I call her and say, you get on a train and meet me in Chicago, and we'll spend a few days in Chicago. I hadn't seen her, or I hadn't slept with her since we got married. And so, but anyway, it all worked out. And so I'm home. Of course, you couldn't get any places to live. There's no building had been taking place during the war. And so I put an ad in the paper. I wanted an apartment. And we were lucky. A lady called. She said, my sister has Alzheimer's. Only at that time they called it hardening of the arteries. And she has an upstairs apartment that you can rent. $25 a month furnished. But we had to live with this lady downstairs, had Alzheimer's, and she didn't know where she was or what she was doing. She'd come upstairs at night and wonder what we were doing upstairs. And my poor wife, she hated it there. So, but we lived there, I think, 6 months. And then we went back and lived with my wife's parents. Well, we had a little garage house built right over here, about 2 miles from here. Well, anyway, now what was I going to say again? Oh, yeah, I was home a week, and I said to my wife, I said, I'm going to go to the newspaper, because I had worked at the newspaper. I said, I'm going to go and talk to the guys down there. And I walked in the door, and I said hi to everybody, and the boss came up to me, and he said, Orley, we got to have you back here. I said, I'm only home a week. I know what he said, but we got to have you. We need help so bad. So I'm home a week and I'm back to work. I stayed there. I worked there till I had worked there before I went to the service. I stayed working at the newspaper until 1977. But in 1970, my wife's parents had a furniture store and they wanted to retire. And my wife had been helping her mother in the furniture store. So she said, my wife said, do you want to shall we take over the furniture store? I said, well, what do you think? She said, I'd kind of like to. So in 1970, we took over the furniture store, but I kept working at the newspaper. And my wife ran the furniture store, and I delivered after I got out of work and unpacked furniture. And until 1977, my wife was having asthma trouble. And she said, we either have to sell the store or you have to quit the Sentinel. I said, okay. I said, I'll quit the Sentinel. And so I quit the newspaper and went to work in the furniture store. And it's a good thing because that's when we really did good. We sold a lot of furniture. What we specialized in was walls. At that time, wall hangings were big. Pictures and candlesticks and all these things that you hang on the wall. We did real good on that. And then in 1984, we rented the store, and the owner said, you have to get out. He said, because I want to make a bakery out of the store. So in 1984, we had a big going out of business sale, and we sold everything. We were blessed. We sold everything we had, and then I started going to work there for the city of Holland in the summer at Windmill Island. I worked there for 10 summers in the summer, and we went to Florida in the winter. And then we moved to a condo, and then we moved here. About 5 years ago, we moved over here. And my wife passed away 2.5 years ago.
How many years were you married?
After almost 72 years. Yeah. So that's my story.
It's a wonderful story. You're a real American hero, and we really appreciate you sitting down and telling us your story today. Thank you so much, Orley. Thank you for everything you did. So you saved the free world. So the bunch of young boys, I find it absolutely fascinating, the age of men that were in that airplane and what you guys achieved in that airplane.
But the thing of it is, I like the Army. I really enjoyed it. Some people they couldn't bear to think of going into the Army, but I loved it. I enjoyed it. And when you're young like that, you really don't see danger. I mean, now that I'm old, we could have got shot down. We could have crashed in the ocean. I know a couple of the guys I knew in Florida, they had ditched. That guy was on 29s. They had ditched in the ocean, and I can't say I always had a good life. And I liked the Army, and I liked my work. I liked the printing business, and I liked the furniture store. So
you've kept in touch with the majority of your through the years.
We were so close. But Joe LeBon, the radio operator, he had a 35 millimeter camera, and all he did was take pictures. And he had roll after roll of pictures, undeveloped. And he said, when I can remember getting off the train and Joe was on his way to Philadelphia, he said, Duke, he said, I'll have all this film developed. He said, and I'll send you pictures. "Oh, good," I said. And then I got a letter back from him. He said, all that film was no good. He said it was all moldy and mildew, and he's sitting on Guam in the heat, and that film was it was no good. So and Joe died of cancer in 1956. He only had 10 years of civilian life. He was a nice guy. Well, they all were nice guys, and Ted Lewis, he's the only one that's left. Bennett died in 1994. Carpenter died in 1996. Hurley died in 2000, and I think Washam died in 84, and Whipple died of cancer. Joe died of cancer. I think Washam died of cancer, and I sometimes wonder if that could have been from that on the plane, the radar on that plane, but I don't know. So.
Bohr just passed away recently.
What?
Chum Bohr just passed away.
Yeah, he just passed away in June.
Yep.
He was the windbag. He could have made this interview last all day. He would have had that many experiences.
So I enjoyed watching the DVD that had him in it, and I enjoyed watching the DVD that had all of you in it. It just seemed like such a tight group of guys, and I found Gilbert to be fascinating because he was this one. He was like the one Southern boy in the whole crew.
He was.
All of you guys were Yankees, and
that's right. He was, yeah.
Midwesterners and Philadelphia guys, and then you get this one guy that's from Florida in the crew. And he made the joke that he had considered naming the plane the Dade City, but he didn't think anybody would know that was.
Yeah, no.
He didn't think anybody would know where Dade City was.
Yeah, he was from Dade City. His dad was a postmaster in Dade City. He's the only person I ever knew that was born and raised in Florida.
Yeah, I thought it was cute in the interview that he did where he said that he wasn't a rich man, and when he signed for the airplane, he told you guys that you had to take care of it and you couldn't lose it because there's no way you could afford to pay for it. If we didn't bring it back, I just thought that was so funny.
That's,
all of you guys are so
Gilbert.
genuine.
That's
it's
Gilbert.
So wonderful.
Yeah, that's Gilbert.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Gilbert.
Well, thank you for your time, Mr. VanDyke. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Do we want to cover the restoration at Sentimental Journey? Do you want to talk about that at all, or?
Well, I know the it's like the National Guard, only they're in the Air Force, and a lot of those guys from the United States that stayed in the reserves, they go to Arizona to Tucson, and they work on the airplane. Oh, yeah, and I didn't tell you about that. Harry Temple was our crew chief, and his nephew, George Litzenberg, was a retired FBI agent, and George was very close to Harry, and George would spend all winter at the museum in Tucson. He had a big motorhome. They gave him a place to park on the grounds, and he lived right on the grounds. And every day, George would give lectures on our airplane, Sentimental Journey. He'd have a whole bunch of chairs set up, and see, our airplane stood outside for quite a few years, and they wanted to raise money to build a hangar for it. So George said, I will give lectures. And so what we as a group did, we got an artist to paint a picture of Sentimental Journey with two other airplanes in formation flying over Mount Fujiyama. And we sold those, George would sell those pictures during his lectures. And George raised $150,000 for a hangar at Pima. He gave good lectures, and he sold while they were there, he was there. Then these guys that were in the reserve, they'd spend a lot of time working on that on our plane. They took thousands of rivets out of it and put new rivets in. And then George bagged those rivets up, and he sold those little bags of rivets. And he sold a lot of stuff with those lectures he gave. But with those paintings, at one of our reunions in Virginia, I think this was in 1991, there were 6 of us there, I think. And we signed a whole bunch of those paintings, and then George would sell them for $500 a piece at the Peta Air Museum. And like I say, he raised $150,000. I don't know what happened to George. All of a sudden, I lost contact with him, and I know he stayed at our house in his motorhome for about a week one time. He just toured the America, and then every winter he'd go to Tucson and give lectures at the museum. So,
seemed like quite an interesting individual. I know he loved his uncle a lot.
So did he ever? Oh yeah. Oh
he was so proud. He was his.
Oh yeah, he loved Harry. Yeah, Harry Temple. Yeah. Well, Harry thought a lot of him too. George. Yeah. I know George was at a couple of our reunions. Yeah, he was quite a guy.
Well, Mr. VanDyke, I think that's going to wrap it for today. I definitely want to get you down to lunch. But thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.